Okay, so we we jumped the gun just a little bit there, and just as we were about to take a 5-minute break, Representative Harrison has joined us to talk about H33, an act relating to allowing legislators to elect taxable or non-taxable meals and lodging expense reimbursement. Representative Harrison, welcome to House Gov.Ops and Military Affairs. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Representative Jim Harrison from the town of Chittenden. I apologize for interrupting your break. Here I am trying to finish something up in committee across the hall. So H33, I'll try to do this real quick. I think it's pretty simple, but as many of you are aware, there was a federal tax law change in 2018. It was part of the whole big package that Congress passed. And one of the provisions in there that probably didn't receive a lot of publicity was the fact that state legislators like ourselves were no longer able to receive reimbursements on per diems unless it was part of an accountable plan. In other words, if the IRS or the federal government allowance for rooms is $134, which is what we follow, you couldn't just get that tax-free any longer. And prior to 2018, legislators could. It was assumed that that was the expense and that was it. Long and short of it is accountable plan means you show accountable expenses. So for mileage, for example, last session, mileage was fully taxable, even though we used the IRS rate. At the end of last session, we collectively approved a change in one of the bills that called the IRS rate, whatever it is, 50 cents, 60 cents, it keeps changing. As long as we're using that rate, that is no longer taxable to legislators. That's easy enough because if we live, in my case, 72 miles from the State House, that's what we put down. We are reimbursed at the IRS rate. And that is assumed that there's a deduction corresponding to that. So with meals and rooms, it's a little trickier, and that's why my bill made it optional. Some people may not want to go through the hassle of coming up with receipts or itemizing their deductions, and I'm not saying you need to. However, if you, and I don't stay there, but if you were renting a room across the street, my understanding is they charge the same as the per diem, $134. The member receives $134 and then taxes are pulled out of that. So there's Social Security taxes, there's Medicare taxes, there's federal income tax, and there's state income tax. So after that is all done, the member may actually net out $110, give or take, depending on an individual's tax bracket. So the member loses money each and every night that they stay across the street. What was further interesting to me is because I'm on appropriations and we tend to come in on Mondays, we're not in session, and even our Ledge Council didn't realize we have to do it this way. We don't get the per diem for expenses. So we actually, if we have to code it differently on Monday, so if we spend $10 for lunch, that's what we're reimbursed, and that is not taxable on Mondays. But Tuesdays, if we did the same thing, it would be taxable. So I'm trying to give an option that's fair to the member and to the state. The state would actually, for anyone that took advantage of this, would actually save money because they wouldn't have to pay the FICA employer share on those per diems. And the way the bill is set up, it's either the overnight rooms or it's the meals or both. But you could say, you know what, I don't want to deal with how much I spent on breakfast and how much I spent on lunch or how much I spent on dinner. I'm just going to take the per diem, pay the taxes, and hopefully I net out. But on rooms, it may be advantageous, certainly a lot easier to deduct it. I had the opportunity last summer to go to a legislative conference that was okayed by the front office. And at the end of the trip, I put in my expenses, copy of my hotel bill, and I was reimbursed 100%. And there was no tax consequences on it because it was an accountable business expense and we weren't in session. So it's simple enough. And my thought was that this, if no one takes advantage of it, it didn't cost us anything, but I think it's fairly straightforward and give people the opportunity to, avoid, you shouldn't lose money on expenses. Expenses are designed to reimburse you for your out-of-pocket costs to serve. So that was the impetus behind doing it. I've talked to legislative operations. I suppose they're probably not looking for anything to make it more complicated, but they have 3 people that okay expenses, and probably anyone that took advantage of this would probably, their expense reports would go to the one of the teams, so it would be consistent and, easy to follow. So hopefully that helps with a kind of a brief overview. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Representative Harrison. Representative Murwicki.
Thanks for bringing that in, Jim. It is a dilemma. When I was an administrator at a small agency, every month I'd have to collect expense receipts, balance them out, and it was an onerous task.
Sure.
You talked to operations. Did they suggest what kind of time frame it would add to their work to take this on for 180?
We already do it now for Mondays, although it's a group of 12. It's not, the whole, it doesn't take
Probably
any.
not 180.
No, and quite frankly, they're not looking for, if I suppose if we put down $50 for lunch, they would be looking for receipts, but, the normal, $8, $10, they're not looking for receipts.
I'm just wondering
Yeah.
if maybe joint fiscal could do a back of the envelope estimate, because I think it's going to cost money on their end. It's their time at Ledge Council to start matching receipts.
That's a good question. I can certainly have a further conversation with the director of legislative operations because they're the ones that would do it. I didn't get the impression in talking to Mike that it would be a big deal. The bill allows them to set any parameters as to what they need for information. Additionally, quite frankly, I don't know how many legislators will take advantage of it. In terms of the per diem meal allowance, it may just be easier to not worry about it for people because they don't want to keep track of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or breakfast and lunch, or whatever it is. So it may be advantageous easier just to take the per diem, pay the taxes on it, and so be it. The room, again, that's an individual. If you're renting an apartment that you're fine, in the per diems, even after tax cover you, you may not worry about it. When I stay over, to give you a personal example, I stay up the road at the Comfort Inn. They have today a special legislative rate. So with tax, I think it's $110, and I'm probably at the break-even point. So is it worth it to me to, it may not be, so.
Representative Cooper.
Do you know Representative, if it's the same legislative rate at each hotel, or do you?
Everyone's different. Across the street, they have a little bit more of a captive audience. They pay, you pay whatever, and they don't even know probably about the tax situation that the people staying there are losing money every night. And whether it's rental housing like hotel rooms, or whether we're talking about regular housing, there's a shortage. So, right now, so the market's tight. It is what it is. But I don't think any member, you make a number of sacrifices to serve here. And I applaud all of you and all of our colleagues for taking up that service and helping your communities back home. But you shouldn't lose money on expense reimbursement.
Thank you very much for introducing us to your bill, Representative Harrison. I'm sure none of us are in this for the money.
If you are, there might be other questions we might have.
But thank you. I think you answered what was my biggest question, which was about the accommodation that legislative operations would have to make. And it sounds like it wouldn't be that big a deal. So maybe we.
Well, it gives them the latitude to say, what do we need? If they want receipts on everything, they can. They probably won't because of the time on their end. And it also puts a cap in here so that you can't find a place that will charge $200 a night and get $200. There's a protection based on the per diems that we get now. So
I just want to add though that when the agency I worked for, when the auditor came in, they wanted to see receipts and they wanted to match them up with what was being requested. I don't know that they have.
And they may. I know they don't ask us for them on Mondays, but you're talking lunch typically. So thank you very much for accommodating me. Again, I'm sorry to delay your break, and it looks like you have another member.
We stacked them up. We were going to try to squeeze one in. I said for us to break.
Yeah,
a couple extra minutes, and then
modest.
Yes, within 10 seconds you walk.
Yeah, I'm modest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope that committee room is doing you well. We warmed up for you last year.
Yeah, we're going to make some changes next week.
So my intention is for us so we're going to invite Representative Sims to come up and do a brief presentation on H20. And we'll take a quick bio break and we'll switch gears to our pension overview. So Representative Sims, welcome to House Government Operations and Military Affairs. Tell us about H20.
Yeah, thanks. Delighted to be back here. What was my committee room last time? Although you guys got a much bigger table than we did.
Just this morning.
Okay.
There are 12 of us.
It's true. We were tiny but mighty. So Representative Catherine Sims, I'm representing Orleans 4, Albany, Craftsbury, Greensboro, Glover, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all talking about H20, an act relating to exploring modification of Vermont's reapportionment process. Say that 10 times fast. And so the purpose of this bill is to strengthen democracy by examining our current redistricting procedures and making recommendations to update them for the 21st century. As you all know, last session, this committee did heroic work when we went through our, once in a decade obligation to update Vermont's legislative district boundaries based on the most recent census. And as a part of that process, the Legislative Apportionment Board prepares and submits, plans for the House and Senate maps. And then the General Assembly either enacts those recommendations or puts forward its own thing. Again, that was a big bulk of this committee's work. And thank you for all of that incredible effort. And it seems to me that right after doing all of that work is the perfect time to reflect on that process and say, what worked well and what improvements can we make before we have to do it again at our next census. I can never say it.
Decennial.
Yeah, you knew. I was like, I'm just going to skip over. And, so what this bill does is it directs the Legislative Apportionment Board to explore other models, take public testimony, and issue a report to the legislature about how we might improve the process. And, in the bill, I'm recommending the LAB lead that effort, but obviously you all might have your own ideas about, who is the right entity to kind of hold this reflection and recommendation process. And, what I think is most important is that somebody, the LAB or anyone else, really take this moment to reflect on the work that we did and, continue to improve our process so that we have the most, nonpartisan process to, do this important work every 10 years. And so, I know you all have a lot on your plate, but I think now's the time to figure out how we can strengthen, trust and faith in the democratic process, which is so important. So I'm happy to answer any questions or, stay in touch as you figure out what your priorities are for the session.
So Representative Sims, thank you for bringing this and reminding those of us who were here and were not, that we just did this thing and we're all thinking it's in the past. We might be thinking about what went well.
I know you're ready to move on. Yeah.
And in terms of the partisanship, we had strong votes out of the committee, strong votes in the House and the Senate. I think that a lot of Vermonters were able to weigh in on the process, but there are probably, as in all things we do here, some access things that I would look at improving. But are there any specific kind of challenges, problems, things that you think we need to be particularly looking at if we did explore opening up the can of worms that is the reapportionment process?
Yeah. So, couldn't agree more about the process that happened last session, in terms of public engagement and the, strong tripartisan support for the plans that we put forward. I think it is worth noting that, we've had the same LAB process since the 1970 census. So that's over 50 years. And, do appreciate that, we have sort of two bodies looking at the maps, but in the 50-year track record, we have not once adopted the LAB House and Senate maps. And so if for no other reason than I guess it does beg the question to me, if we ask this other body to go through all of this work over the course of the year, and then we don't ever advance those recommendations, are there things that we can do to approve the, tremendous amount of work that goes into that, I think does guide this process, but we have never once adopted those maps in the 50-year history. So it's the question for me, are there ways that we can improve that process? And again, I think this is more of a philosophical question than a specific reflection on the process that happened last year. But I think, the adage, constituents to choose their politicians shouldn't choose their constituents. I think that, there is something to be said for having the body of currently elected officials having the final say about the map, that I would welcome collective conversation about whether that's the best model, or might we learn things from others or imagine something new ourselves to, again, engender the most, trust in this process.
Does anyone have any questions for Representative Sims? Representative Cooper.
A general question, after making their recommendations, the LAB still constituted, or they I can't imagine them sitting around for 10 years waiting for the next one. I don't even know how they get appointed, quite frankly.
Others might correct me, but my understanding is that they're 3 Republican appointees, 3 Democratic appointees, and then the Supreme Court nominates the chair.
Oh gosh, you're testing the formation of the LAB. I can't remember exactly, but yes, there are multiple stakeholders that get. And
I believe it's a body that is appointed. It has specific duties at specific times, but and they may not have any duties right now. But I believe the board still exists in its construct. Hence, it could take on this additional responsibility of reflecting on the process and making recommendations.
And to your last point, I guess. They recommended something that was fundamentally changing the process or the framework when they put forward a single seat district for everybody.
Again, I think the process is that this body, which has appointed members, recommends a map, and then the General Assembly either adopts
Yes.
one or both of those maps, or they propose an alternative map that we adopt. I think and then there's a constitutional construct and framework about how the map needs to best adhere to equal representation for all, but one or two seat districts is both, consistent within that framework. And
Well, the point that I was going to get to was it seems appropriate for the legislative body to make a decision about something that changed its fundamental process as opposed to the board.
I mean, we don't need to weigh in this too far, but I mean, I think the recommendation was a map,
Yeah, and we.
and that has nothing to do with the
And we use
process.
that map as a pretty basic framework, so.
For the folks back home, the House Gov.Ops committee last year, there was a 4-3 split on the LAB's recommendations. And I think many of the district lines kind of started from the minority report, which had a mixture of first and the alternative proposal from the minority of the lab. So the process yielded a lot of information and thought that did go into the final reapportionment map. But the point that Representative Sims is making is well taken, that it's a lot of work that those folks do. And then we go, okay, nice suggestion, and start doing our work. So that may or may not be the most democratic and participatory process. And I think it's great that we've got this bill on our wall to remind us that we should probably take a look at what we did last year. So thank you for joining us today. I think unless anybody's got any urgent questions, Representative Nugent.
Just one question. Is there any reason that we could not undertake this reflection like outside of legislation? Or do you need a bill to do that?
Well, I believe our favorite task is to task somebody else with, certainly an informal group could take this on, but I think, the value of the legislature, requesting a report is it has that sort of statutory authority that it comes back to us, and, we've asked for it, and then it comes back to us, and hopefully that informs the work that we do moving forward. I think the scope of, learning from what other states have done and looking at whether we've done it differently here in our own state and getting testimony and feedback, to me seems like a heavy lift that might be beyond the capacity of a committee to do during session when you have so many other things on your plate. And so, again, I think there might be value in identifying a group, and investing it with some authority to do some of this due diligence and come back to us and inform. We have some time until the next decennial census, but, I think while it's fresh in our mind, what we just did and what worked well and what process improvements might be helpful, it seems to me like now would be a great time to do this. And if we wait too long, we might kind of forget again what we did.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Representative Sims.
For the time. Glad to see you down here in the lower deck.
Yeah, it's nice to have the big room. We are a little far away from many of our other House committees, but we've got appropriations across the hall, so the money is right there. We're going to take a 10-minute break here. So I want to see everybody back here at 2:18. So we're just running a couple minutes late, and then we'll be hearing a presentation, Little Pensions 101 for the uninitiated, and I'm looking forward